The envelope sat on my desk like a loaded weapon. Plain manila, standard office issue, the kind you'd use for interdepartmental mail or expense reports. Nothing remarkable about it except for what was inside. 3 printed pages that would detonate the comfortable fiction Archstone Industries had been selling its employees for the better part of a decade. My name is Olivia Brooks. I'm 34 years old, and up until 72 hours ago, I genuinely believed I'd finally landed somewhere that valued competence over politics. A place where 12 years of grinding through financial audits, compliance reviews, and budget reconciliations might actually translate into recognition that mattered. I was spectacularly wrong. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this actually began, back to the moment I walked into Archstone's gleaming headquarters in downtown Philadelphia, portfolio in hand, ready to prove I deserved the title they'd offered me. Senior Budget Analyst. The recruiter had made it sound like a career-defining opportunity. Archstone Industries was a mid-tier manufacturing consulting firm, roughly 500 employees. Clients ranging from automotive suppliers to industrial equipment manufacturers. They specialized in operational efficiency, which was corporate speak for telling other companies how to cut costs without destroying productivity. The salary offer was $72,000 annually, 35% higher than what I'd been making at my previous position in Cleveland. The benefits package looked solid. The growth trajectory seemed promising. I gave 4 weeks' notice at my old firm, packed everything I owned into a rented moving truck, and drove 6 hours east through a February snowstorm to start what I thought would be the next chapter of my professional life. Day 1 was unremarkable in all the expected ways. The HR coordinator, a pleasant woman named Diane Foster, walked me through the standard onboarding routine. Badge photo where I stood against an institutional beige wall trying not to look as exhausted as I felt. System access setup where an IT technician who looked about 19 years old explained password protocols I'd been following since before he was born. Compliance training modules covering harassment policies, confidentiality agreements, and workplace safety procedures I could have written myself. Then came the introductions. My direct supervisor was a man named Tyler Monroe, mid-50s, graying hair, wire-rimmed glasses that kept sliding down his nose when he leaned over financial reports. He seemed competent enough, methodical in his explanations, precise in his expectations. You'll be working closely with our operations team, Tyler explained as we walked through the third-floor office space. Budget forecasting, variance analysis, quarterly reporting packages for clients. Standard stuff for someone with your background. I nodded, taking mental notes of the layout. Open floor plan with low cubicle walls. The kind designed to promote collaboration but mostly just meant everyone could hear everyone else's phone conversations. Conference rooms with glass walls. A break room that smelled perpetually of burnt coffee and microwaved lunches. You'll also be collaborating with some of our newer analysts, Tyler continued, gesturing toward a cluster of cubicles near the windows. We've been bringing in fresh talent over the last quarter. Bright kids eager to learn. Fresh talent turned out to be corporate euphemism for a collection of recent college graduates who'd been hired into roles that traditionally required 5 to 7 years of experience. One of them was Colton Rivers. 25 years old, expensive haircut, designer button-down shirt that probably cost more than my entire week's wardrobe. He had the kind of casual confidence that comes from never having to worry about whether opportunities would materialize, the assurance of someone who'd always had doors opened before he even reached for the handle. Colton, this is Olivia Brooks, Tyler said, introducing us. She'll be taking over the quarterly forecasting responsibilities from the previous analyst. Colton extended his hand with an easy smile. Great to meet you. Looking forward to working together. His handshake was firm but brief, professional in the way people are when they've been coached on workplace etiquette but haven't internalized why it matters. Same position as you, Tyler added almost casually. Senior Budget Analyst. Colton joined us about 3 weeks ago. I smiled politely, running a quick mental calculation. 3 weeks. Same title as mine. Recent graduate based on his age. Where were you working before Archstone? I asked, making conversation. This is actually my first full-time position, Colton said, still smiling. I graduated last spring, did some consulting work for my dad's firm over the summer, then started here in January. First full-time position. Same title as someone with 12 years of experience. I kept my expression neutral, professional. Well, welcome to the grind, I said lightly. He laughed, an easy, untroubled sound. Yeah, definitely a learning curve. Tyler's been great about getting me up to speed. I filed the interaction away and moved on with my day. The first week passed in a blur of system navigation, file organization, and trying to understand Archstone's particular flavor of corporate dysfunction. Every company has its quirks, its inefficient processes that exist because that's how we've always done it, its unwritten rules about who to copy on emails and which meetings actually matter. Archstone was no different. What was different, what I started noticing around day 4 or 5, was how often I ended up explaining basic financial concepts to Colton. Hey Olivia, quick question, he'd say, appearing at the entrance to my cubicle with his laptop balanced in one hand. I'm trying to build this variance report and I'm not sure how to structure the formula for calculating percentage change. Or, can you take a look at this budget allocation? I think my numbers are off but I can't figure out where. Or, what's the difference between EBITDA and operating income again? Each question was reasonable in isolation. Everyone needs help sometimes, especially when starting a new position. But the frequency and the fundamental nature of what he was asking started painting a picture I didn't particularly like. This wasn't someone who needed occasional clarification on Archstone's specific procedures. This was someone who didn't understand the basic mechanics of the job he'd been hired to do. By the end of week 1, I'd walked Colton through Excel formulas he should have learned in undergraduate business courses, explained financial metrics that were industry standard, and essentially rebuilt 2 of his client reports from scratch because the analysis he'd attempted made no mathematical sense. You're a lifesaver, he said cheerfully each time, as though teaching him his job was just part of my natural responsibilities. I smiled, nodded, and swallowed my growing irritation. Week 2 was when the unease sharpened into something colder. I'd come in early on a Tuesday morning, trying to make progress on a complex forecasting model for one of Archstone's largest clients. The office was mostly empty, just a handful of other early arrivals scattered across the floor, heads down in their work. I needed historical budget data going back 3 fiscal years. Tyler had mentioned it would be in the shared operations drive, organized by client name and fiscal period. I navigated to the drive, clicked through the folder structure, found the client directory I needed. Inside was a subfolder labeled Archive under FI 2019-2024. I clicked it. The folder opened and my screen filled with dozens of files. Budget templates, client presentations, variance reports, audit documentation. I scrolled through looking for the specific historical data I needed. Then I saw a file that didn't belong. Compensation_analysis_operations_Q4_internal.xx. I should have closed it immediately. Should have backed out, continued with my actual task, pretended I never saw it. But curiosity is instinctive, especially when a file is sitting in a location it absolutely shouldn't be, labeled with words like compensation and internal. I clicked it. The spreadsheet loaded. Column headers appeared. Employee name, position title, department, hire date, years of experience, annual base salary, total compensation package. Rows of data filled the screen. Names I was still learning to match with faces. Titles ranging from junior analyst to department director. Salary figures that made my stomach tighten. I scrolled slowly, scanning the information, trying to understand what I was looking at and why someone had left it buried in an operations archive folder. Then I found my own name. Row 47. Olivia Brooks, Senior Budget Analyst, Operations, hired January 15, 2024, 12 years experience, annual base, $72,000. Exactly what they'd offered me. Right in line with what I'd expected based on market research and my background. I kept scrolling. 3 rows down I saw it. Row 50. Colton Rivers, Senior Budget Analyst, Operations, hired January 8, 2024, 0 years experience, annual base, $122,000. The number sat there on my screen, black text on white background, absolutely undeniable. $122,000. 70% more than me. For the same exact job title. 0 years of experience. My hands went very still on the keyboard. The office sounds, the ambient hum of HVAC systems and distant keyboard clicking, faded into background static. $122,000. I read it again, certain I'd misunderstood. Maybe there was a decimal point error. Maybe the column header was mislabeled. Maybe this was some kind of internal joke file that someone created as a thought experiment. But the data was too detailed, too precisely formatted. Names matched current employees. Hire dates aligned with when people had actually started. Other salary figures looked consistent with industry norms. This wasn't a joke file. This was real compensation data. And Colton Rivers, the 25-year-old who needed help building Excel formulas and couldn't explain what EBITDA meant, was making nearly double what I earned. I clicked on his employee profile link embedded in the spreadsheet. The system loaded his complete personnel file. Date of birth: March 12, 1999. Education: Bachelor of Science, Business Administration, State University, graduated May 2023. Previous employment: Marketing Coordinator, Summer Intern, Rivers Commercial Properties, June-August 2023. Certifications: none. Relevant experience: none. Reporting Manager: Tyler Monroe. Special notes: Executive referral, priority hire. Executive referral. I clicked the notation. A pop-up window appeared with additional details. Employee referred by CO Preston Rivers. Approved for accelerated placement and premium compensation package in alignment with Strategic Talent Acquisition Initiative. Preston Rivers. Colton Rivers. The CEO's son. I sat back in my chair staring at the screen, feeling something cold and heavy settle in my chest. This wasn't a merit-based hire. This wasn't strategic talent acquisition. This was nepotism dressed up in corporate language, sanctioned at the highest level, hidden behind closed-door decisions and confidential compensation files that employees weren't supposed to see. And I, someone who'd spent 12 years building financial systems, surviving brutal audit cycles, training junior staff who eventually got promoted past me, had been hired at a rate so insultingly low it felt like a slap across the face. Not because I wasn't qualified. Because I didn't have the right last name. I printed the spreadsheet. My hands were shaking slightly as I folded the pages and slipped them into my bag. Then I logged out, sat in the empty office silence for a long moment and made a decision. I walked straight to HR. The Human Resources Department occupied a suite of offices on the second floor, all frosted glass and motivational posters about teamwork and excellence. The department director was a woman named Carolyn Hart, early 50s, immaculate pantsuit, the kind of professional polish that comes from decades of navigating corporate politics without making waves. Her assistant told me she was available and gestured toward the office door. I knocked. Carolyn looked up from her computer screen and smiled warmly. Olivia, hello. How are you settling into Archstone? I need to discuss a compensation issue, I said, cutting through the pleasantries. Her smile faltered slightly. Of course. Please sit down. I sat, pulled the printed spreadsheet from my bag and placed it on her desk with deliberate care. The pages were folded so only the relevant rows were visible, mine and Colton's side by side. I accidentally accessed this file while searching for client data in the operations archive, I said, keeping my voice level. I'd like an explanation for why someone hired a week before me with zero relevant experience and the same job title is being paid 70% more than I am. Carolyn's eyes dropped to the paper. For a fraction of a second her expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. She went very still, the kind of stillness that comes from rapid mental calculation. Olivia, she said slowly, her voice taking on a carefully modulated tone, this document contains confidential personnel information that you shouldn't have access to. I understand that, I said. It was an accidental discovery. But now that I've seen it, I need you to explain how this compensation structure is anything other than systematic discrimination. Silence stretched between us, taut and uncomfortable. Carolyn folded her hands on her desk, her expression shifting from warm to professionally distant. Compensation decisions at Archstone are based on multiple complex factors, she said, each word precise and rehearsed. Market conditions, role complexity, projected growth trajectory, strategic organizational value, individual negotiation outcomes. There are nuances to these decisions that can't be fully understood by reviewing isolated data points. Colton Rivers is listed as having 0 years of relevant experience, I said flatly. He has the same job title as me. I have 12 years in financial operations. What nuances justify paying him 70% more? Carolyn's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I'm not at liberty to discuss another employee's compensation details with you. That would violate confidentiality policies. Then let's discuss mine, I said. Was I hired significantly below market rate while the CEO's son, who is fundamentally unqualified for this position, was given a premium salary package as an executive referral? Another pause, longer this time. I could see her weighing her options, calculating risk. Olivia, I understand this might feel inequitable from your perspective, she finally said, her voice dropping into something colder and more calculated. But Archstone operates in a competitive environment. Sometimes attracting what we consider high potential talent requires offering premium packages that reflect future value rather than current experience. High potential talent, I repeated slowly. Is that what we're calling nepotism now? Her expression hardened completely, the professional warmth evaporating like water on hot asphalt. I think we're done here, Carolyn said, standing abruptly. You've been with Archstone for exactly 9 days, Olivia. I suggest you focus on learning your responsibilities and integrating with your team rather than concerning yourself with compensation strategy decisions that are well above your level. She walked to her office door and opened it, the dismissal unmistakable. You have 2 choices, she added, her voice quiet but edged with steel. Accept the position you agreed to when you signed your employment contract or resign. Those are your options. I stood slowly, meeting her eyes directly. Understood, I said. Then I walked out. But as I left her office, my heart pounding and my thoughts crystallizing into something clearer and colder than anger, I realized something important. He was wrong. I had a third option. That night, I sat in my sparsely furnished apartment, surrounded by half-unpacked moving boxes I hadn't found time to organize, and I started building a case. Not a legal case, not yet. A factual one. I opened my laptop, pulled up the compensation spreadsheet I'd saved to my personal cloud storage, and started cross-referencing every single name on that list. LinkedIn profiles, company bios, industry salary surveys, Glassdoor reports, public compensation data for budget analysts at comparable firms, professional certification databases, educational background verification. The deeper I dug, the more damning the pattern became. Every executive's relatives, sons, daughters, nieces, nephews, even a couple of cousins who'd graduated in the last 18 months with degrees in unrelated fields, had been placed in inflated roles with salaries that would make industry veterans weep with frustration. Colton Rivers, $122,000 for zero relevant experience and a business degree from a mid-tier state school. Amanda Foster, $108,000. For a junior financial analyst position, 18 months out of college, daughter of VP of Business Development. Ryan Caldwell, $95,000. As an associate budget analyst, 24 years old, nephew of my supervisor Tyler, degree in communications. Jessica Hart, $117,000 as a senior operations analyst, daughter of HR Director Carolyn Hart, previous experience consisting of 2 years managing social media for a lifestyle blog. Meanwhile, the people actually doing the work, the analysts who built complex forecasting models, the managers who wrote compliance reports, the controllers who kept Archstone audit-ready and compliant with federal contracting requirements, were systematically underpaid. Senior financial analyst, 8 years experience, $69,000. Lead operations analyst, 11 years experience, $74,000. Budget manager, 14 years with the company, $81,000. Finance controller who'd personally navigated Archstone through 3 federal audits, $88,000. It wasn't just unfair. It was systematic wage suppression disguised as strategic compensation planning. Archstone had built an entire operational model on underpaying loyal, experienced employees while funneling inflated salaries to unqualified relatives of executives. They were counting on people being too afraid, too exhausted, or too grateful to have employment to speak up. They were counting on silence. By 2:30 in the morning, I had compiled a comprehensive report. 34 pages, single-spaced, professionally formatted. Employee names, titles, hire dates, salary comparisons, educational backgrounds, professional qualifications, industry benchmark data. I created charts showing the salary gap between nepotism hires and merit-based employees. I highlighted specific examples where someone with 18 months of experience was making 50% more than a 12-year veteran. I formatted it with clean fonts, clear section headers, color-coded data visualization. At the very top I wrote a title in bold center text. Archstone Industries. A comprehensive analysis of nepotistic hiring practices and systematic wage discrimination. Then I printed 5 copies. One for Preston Rivers, the CEO. One for my personal records. One for the Department of Labor. One for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And one for every single employee in the building. The next morning I woke up at 4:15 without an alarm. Just adrenaline and absolute clarity of purpose. I showered, dressed in my most professional clothes, black blazer, crisp white shirt, tailored pants, and drove to Archstone's office building while the sky was still dark and empty. The parking lot was deserted except for a few vehicles belonging to the overnight cleaning crew. I badged into the building. The security guard, an older man named Frank who was usually reading paperback thrillers at his desk, barely glanced up as I walked past. "Early start, Ms. Brooks," he said absently. "Big project deadline," I replied, keeping my voice casual. The elevator carried me to the executive floor, 5th level, where the air always seemed slightly more refined, the carpet slightly thicker, the silence more expensive. Preston Rivers's office was at the far end of the hallway, behind double doors of dark wood and brushed steel hardware. The nameplate read Preston Rivers, Chief Executive Officer, in elegant engraved letters. I tried the handle. Locked as expected. But the executive assistant's desk, positioned just outside in the reception area, was unlocked. The assistant, our efficient woman named Helen, kept immaculately organized filing systems and a key ring in her top drawer for accessing executive offices for urgent deliveries. I'd seen her retrieve it once during my first week when Tyler needed to drop off time-sensitive documents. The drawer slid open silently. The key ring sat exactly where I remembered, labeled clearly. I took the key marked CO office, unlocked the double doors and stepped inside. Preston Rivers's office was exactly what you'd expect from someone who valued appearance over substance. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Philadelphia skyline. Leather furniture that probably cost more than my car. A desk so pristine and carefully arranged it looked like a museum display. Photographs on the credenza, family shots. Preston with his wife at some charity gala. Preston shaking hands with local politicians. Preston and Colton at what looked like a college graduation ceremony. I walked across the expensive carpet, my footsteps completely silent, and placed a sealed manila envelope directly in the center of his desk. Plain, unmarked except for my name written neatly on the outside in black ink. No dramatic note. No explanation. Just the report. Then I turned around, locked the doors behind me, returned the key to Helen's drawer, and left the executive floor exactly as I'd found it. I didn't go home. I went back to my desk on the 3rd floor, logged into my workstation and opened my email. I pulled up Archstone's company directory. All 487 employees, from entry-level administrative staff to senior executives. I started a new message and added every single person to the recipient line. The subject line read, Compensation Transparency Report, What Archstone Doesn't Want You to Know. Then I attached the complete 34-page report and wrote a brief, direct message. Colleagues, *, you deserve to know what you're worth. You deserve to know what the people working beside you are being paid. *, Archstone Industries has built its success on your expertise, your long hours and your dedication. Meanwhile, it has systematically underpaid experienced employees while rewarding family connections over qualifications. *. Attached is a detailed analysis of Archstone's compensation structure, including comparisons to industry standards and documentation of significant disparities between merit-based hires and nepotistic placements. *. Read it. Share it. Decide for yourself what it means. *. Olivia Brooks, Senior Budget Analyst. My finger hovered over the send button for exactly 7 seconds. Doubt crept in like cold water. What if I was wrong? What if this destroyed any chance I had of working in this industry again? What if nobody cared? Then I remembered Carolyn Hart's voice. *, accept it or resign. Those are your options. *. I clicked send. The email left my outbox with a soft final whoosh. I leaned back in my chair, hands steady, heart calm, and waited for the storm. At 7:30, the first employees started arriving. By 7:50, my inbox had 6 replies. By 8:05, it had 34. By 8:15, people were standing in hallways with their phones out, reading, voices rising in disbelief and anger. Is this data real? How did she get access to this? Look at Amanda's salary. She's been here 6 months. This has to be illegal. By 8:20, someone had printed the entire report and taped pages to the wall outside the main break room. By 8:30, a crowd had gathered, people pointing at specific sections, taking photos with their phones. At 8:33, Preston Rivers arrived. I know the exact time because I heard his voice echo down the third-floor hallway, sharp and furious. Who the hell authorized this? Carolyn, get up here right now. Tyler, conference room. Now. Footsteps, fast and heavy. By 8:50, the chaos had spread to every floor. People were clustering near copy machines, standing in doorways, voices overlapping in waves of shock and outrage. The finance department was buzzing. The operations team was passing tablets around. Even the usually reserved IT department was animatedly discussing the numbers. At 9:12, my desk phone rang. Internal extension. Security. Ms. Brooks, you're required to report to Executive Conference Room 5 immediately. On my way, I said calmly. I stood, straightened my blazer, and walked toward the elevator. The ride to the 5th floor felt longer than usual. The doors opened onto a hallway that was too quiet, tension thick enough to taste. I walked to Conference Room 5 and opened the door. 7 people were waiting inside. Preston Rivers, CEO. Late 50s, silver hair, expensive suit, face red with barely controlled rage. Carolyn Hart, HR Director. Pale, gripping a leather portfolio like it was a lifeline. Colton Rivers, looking confused and deeply uncomfortable, like he'd woken up in the wrong person's life. Tyler Monroe, my supervisor, sitting to the side with an expression I couldn't quite read, somewhere between concern and resignation. 2 men I didn't recognize, dark suits, leather briefcases. Lawyers. Anne Helen, the executive assistant, sitting near the door with a laptop open, presumably to take notes. Nobody invited me to sit. Preston didn't waste time on pleasantries. What the hell do you think you're doing? He said, his voice tight and controlled but vibrating with fury. Providing transparency, I said calmly. You stole confidential company data. I accessed a file that was improperly stored in a shared network directory, I corrected. And I documented factual, verifiable information about systematic compensation practices that your employees have both a legal and ethical right to understand. You have no right. I have every right, I interrupted, my voice still calm but harder now. And unless you want this report forwarded to the Department of Labor, the EEOC, the SEC, every business publication in Philadelphia, and every single one of your federal contract administrators who would be very interested to learn how a company holding government contracts systematically discriminates in compensation practices, I suggest you sit down and listen to what I have to say. Complete silence. The kind of silence that feels like the air has been sucked out of the room. Preston's face went from red to a deep, dangerous purple. But he sat down slowly, deliberately, his hands gripping the edge of the conference table. One of the lawyers leaned forward. Ms. Brooks, you're in clear violation of. I'm in violation of nothing, I said, cutting him off cleanly. I accessed data I had system permissions to view. I documented factual compensation information. I shared that information internally with other employees. If you want to argue that transparency itself is a fireable offense, go ahead and try. But I'll make sure every employment attorney in Pennsylvania hears about it by this afternoon. The lawyer's mouth closed. Preston's hands were trembling slightly where they gripped the table. What do you want? He said through clenched teeth. I want you to fix it, I said simply. Fix what? Everything. Market rate salary corrections for every tenured employee who's been systematically underpaid. Retroactive back pay calculated over the last 4 fiscal years. Transparent, publicly posted salary bands going forward. An external third-party audit of all compensation practices conducted by an independent firm. And a formal written policy explicitly prohibiting nepotistic hiring and requiring documented justification for any compensation decisions that deviate significantly from market standards. One of the lawyers started to object. I held up one hand, palm out. Or, I said loud enough to cut through the room, I walk out of this building right now, take this report directly to the Philadelphia Inquirer, post the complete analysis on LinkedIn, file formal complaints with the Department of Labor and the EOC, and let your investors, your board of directors, and your federal contract officers decide how they feel about a consulting firm that pays the CEO's unqualified son 70% more than a senior analyst with 12 years of documented experience. The room went utterly still. Preston stared at me like I'd just set his desk on fire and thrown gasoline on it for good measure. Carolyn looked down at her portfolio like it contained a parachute she couldn't figure out how to deploy. Colton looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him into some alternate dimension where this conversation wasn't happening. Finally, Preston spoke, his voice quiet and dangerous. "You've been here 2 weeks," he said slowly. "And you think you can walk into my company and blow up everything I've built?" "I didn't blow up anything," I said evenly. "You built this system. You created these practices. You approved these compensation packages. I just turned on the lights so people could see what was actually happening." "You're fired," Preston said flatly. "Perfect," I replied immediately. "I'll add wrongful termination and retaliation to the formal complaints I'm filing this afternoon. Should make for a very interesting discovery process during litigation." Preston's jaw worked silently, teeth grinding. Carolyn leaned over and whispered something urgent in his ear. Her face had gone from pale to almost gray. Preston closed his eyes. When he opened them again, some of the fight had drained out, replaced by cold calculation. "We'll review the compensation structure," he said slowly, each word sounding like it physically hurt to produce. "Internally. Confidentially. This stays inside these walls. No press, no lawsuits, no public scandals." "That depends," I said, "on how comprehensive your corrections are and how honestly they're implemented." I stood up, picked up my bag and looked directly at Colton. "For what it's worth," I said, "this isn't personal. You didn't set your own salary. But you also didn't deserve it. And somewhere along the way, someone should have told you that accepting opportunities you haven't earned comes with consequences." Colton said nothing. He just stared at the table, face flushed with shame or anger or some combination I couldn't identify. I walked to the door, opened it and paused without turning around. "You have 72 hours, I said. "After that, everything goes public." Then I walked out, letting the door close with a soft final click behind me. Behind me, I heard Preston Rivers slam his fist into the conference table so hard the sound echoed down the hallway like a gunshot. But I didn't look back. By 10:45, my company-wide email had been forwarded to external contacts. Former colleagues, industry peers, friends in adjacent sectors. By 1:30, a business reporter from the Philadelphia Business Journal reached out via LinkedIn asking if I'd be willing to provide comment on allegations regarding compensation practices at Archstone Industries. By 3:15, Archstone's board of directors had called an emergency closed-door session. And by 6:05, a new company-wide email went out, not from Preston but from the board's interim chairman. Subject: Immediate compensation review and corrective actions. Effective immediately, Archstone Industries is conducting a comprehensive third-party audit of all compensation structures across the organization. All employees will be contacted individually within the next 96 hours regarding adjustments, corrections and retroactive back pay where applicable. We are committed to transparency, equity, and fair treatment of all team members regardless of tenure, background, or personal relationships. Further updates will be provided as the review process continues. I read it twice, sitting in my apartment with a glass of wine I wasn't actually drinking. Then I packed my desk. I didn't have much. Coffee mug, notebook, framed photo of my sister and her kids. A small succulent plant that was somehow still alive despite my neglect. I turned in my badge at the security desk. Frank, the guard, looked at me with something like respect. "Heard what you did," he said quietly. "People are talking. Most of them are saying thank you." I nodded, smiled slightly. Just doing what was right. The sun was setting as I drove away from Archstone's headquarters for the last time. The sky was streaked with orange and purple, city lights starting to flicker on across Philadelphia's skyline. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry. I just felt lighter, like I'd been carrying something impossibly heavy for years and had finally set it down. 3 weeks later, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Olivia, this is Tyler. I wanted you to know the salary corrections went through yesterday. Back pay hit accounts this morning. People are emotional. Several broke down crying when they saw the numbers. You changed lives here. Thank you. Asterisk. 2 hours after that, another message. Asterisk. Colton resigned last week. Board gave him an ultimatum. Resign voluntarily or be terminated for cause related to misrepresentation of qualifications. He took the first option. Word is he's working at his father's commercial real estate firm now. Asterisk. And then late that evening, a final message from someone whose name I didn't recognize but whose email signature identified her as a senior financial controller. Asterisk. Preston Rivers stepped down as CEO this afternoon. Board cited governance failures and accountability issues. Carolyn Hart was also asked to resign. Thought you'd want to know. You actually did this. You actually changed everything. Asterisk. I read all 3 messages sitting on my couch, laptop open, job search sites glowing on the screen. Then I closed the computer, leaned back and smiled. Not because I'd won some corporate battle, but because I'd finally stopped accepting a system that valued the wrong things. 2 weeks into the job, they told me to accept their broken system or leave. I chose neither. I forced them to face what they'd built. And when they tried to bury the truth, I made sure everyone could see it. 5 months later, I accepted a position at a competitor. They'd reached out after reading about the Archstone transparency incident in industry publications. The compensation package was 63% higher than what Archstone had originally offered me. Not because of my last name. Because of my work. On my first day, the CFO shook my hand and said something I'll never forget. We don't hire people based on who they're related to. We hire them based on what they can do. And from everything I've seen, you're exactly the kind of person who makes organizations better just by refusing to accept mediocrity. I smiled. That's all I ever wanted, I said. Sometimes a system doesn't change because people ask nicely or file quiet complaints that get buried in HR filing cabinets. It changes because someone finally refuses to stay quiet. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt undervalued while watching less qualified people get ahead based on connections rather than competence, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. If you've